It was just past 1 a.m. on July 23, 1945. The men of USS Barb had infiltrated the Japanese home islands. Near Hokkaido, save for the faint hum of insects in the still night air, the countryside was silent. Far from any battlefield, 5 Americans crouched in the shadows, their faces streaked with black polish and their breaths measured. Under the faint glow of a red-lensed flashlight, Engineman 3rd Class Hatfield's hands worked methodically, connecting wires to a crude pressure switch. But that night, their target wasn't a ship, a convoy, or even a port. These American submariners were here to destroy a train. Swish. In October 1942, USS Barb, a brand new Hokkaido-class submarine, set out on her first significant mission, Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. With a crew of 80 and armed with 10 torpedo tubes and a 4-inch deck gun, her task was to deploy scouts in rubber boats to mark landing sites at Fedhala, Mehedia, Safi, and Algiers. However, navigational and communication errors sent Barb scouts far off course. Caught in the crossfire between Allied destroyers and enemy shore batteries, the men had no choice but to wait before they were rescued hours later. After this rocky start, Barb hunted German blockade runners in the Bay of Biscay. Operating out of Scotland during the summer of 1943, she disrupted enemy supply lines, including sinking a presumed German tanker. On the submarine's 5th patrol in the frigid North Atlantic, 24-year-old gunner's mate Paul Golden Saunders found himself thrust into the spotlight when Barb's executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Everett Steinmetz, asked the chief of the boat to train the young man as the dive manifold operator, a critical and high-stakes role, responsible for controlling the vessel's ballast tanks during dives. A mere day into his training, while the submarine was speeding ahead on all 4 main engines, the lookout spotted the unmistakable glint of an enemy periscope. As the diving alarm blared all throughout the ship, all men, including Saunders, scrambled to their stations. Upon realizing a young sailor, new to the role essential for the submarine's security, was at the controls during this highly critical time, Steinmetz's heart sank. Knowing high-speed dives demanded precision, and most of all, experience, he and the chief of the boat bolted at full speed toward the control room, ready to take over if needed. But by the time the officers reached the control room, the dive was complete. Trainee Saunders had operated the ballast tanks in perfect sequence with a calm and deliberate hand, moving fluidly from one side of the submarine to another, making Barb slip beneath the waves just in time. Shocked, Steinmetz stared at Saunders, later recalling, quote, "I qualified him then and there." Even after the tense moment had passed, the young sailor remained focused, leaving the crew in awe of his abilities. From that day forward, Paul Saunders was no longer just a trainee. He was Swish. New leadership. That fall, following 5 relatively unsuccessful patrols in and around Europe, after refitting and intensive training, USS Barb was on her way to the Pacific for patrol duty, where her first 2 patrols brought few successes. But this was all about to change. In April 1944, Lieutenant Commander Eugene Bennett Lucky Flucky took command of Barb. The 33-year-old was no ordinary naval officer, but a daring mix of calculated risk-taking and brilliant tactical insight. A strong believer in using his submarine's speed advantage while surfaced, the commander's most frequently uttered motto was, quote, "We don't have problems, just solutions." Upon taking command of the submarine, Flucky's first bold decision was making Paul Swish Saunders his chief of the boat, the submarine's top enlisted leader, and the captain's go-to for all things crew-related, keeping morale high, discipline sharp, and making sure the entire team ran like a well-oiled machine. At first, Swish was hesitant to Flucky's offer, stating, quote, "Not me, Captain, no way. All the men are my friends. As chief of the boat, I'd have to tell them off and discipline them. How could I do that?" But Flucky wouldn't take no for an answer, and assured the young man that leadership wasn't about rank or authority, responding, quote, "Do your best to correct your mistakes, and don't be afraid to ask for help from anyone from top to bottom." With that, the deal was struck, and Flucky turned his attention back to the enemy. Under his leadership, Barb adopted bold, unorthodox tactics to catch Japanese vessels completely off guard. Together, the skipper and his chief of the boat became an unstoppable force. As one sailor put it, quote, "The combination of Commander Eugene B. Flucky and Swish Saunders was like electricity. They were both of the same mold. Attack and destroy was their motto. With several unsuccessful patrols behind them, Flucky refused to wait for the Japanese Navy to come to him. If the enemy wouldn't present itself, he'd bring the fight straight to their doorstep. Attack and destroy. In May 1944, with a daring new skipper and a steadfast chief of the boat, USS Barb ventured into the unforgiving waters of northern Japan, charting a course through the treacherous waters of the Kuril Islands, Hokkaido, and the Sea of Okhotsk, determined to change her luck. Near the end of the month, her torpedoes claimed cargo ships Kotomaru and Madras Maru, sending thousands of tons of enemy cargo to the ocean floor in a single strike. Days later, an aggressive engagement with a lone ship forced Barb to evade the counterattacks by slipping into the concealing ice fields of the northern Kurils. Despite the close call, Barb wasn't finished. On June 11th, she quickly tore into 2 trawlers with her deck guns. Mere moments later, upon spotting 2 much larger targets, Toten Maru and Chihaya Maru, her torpedoes sent both to the bottom of the ocean. With her final torpedo left, the submarine targeted a passenger cargo ship. By the end of the patrol, the submarine and her men had sunk a staggering 15,472 tons of enemy shipping, all in a single day. Through it all, Flucky and Swish proved an unstoppable duo, especially the latter, whose leadership quickly earned him the admiration of the crew. According to boat signalman Neil Sever, quote, "I never saw him pull rank on any of us. He was pleasant and treated us as his equal." Team effort. For her 9th patrol, Barb joined forces with fellow submarines Queenfish and Tunny in a coordinated wolfpack team, targeting Japanese convoys in the Manila-Hong Kong sea lanes. On August 31st, the group closed in on a heavily defended convoy, with Queenfish striking first, sinking 2 ships, and Barb following suit, unleashing 3 torpedoes and damaging a tanker and a freighter. Following the initial attack, Flucky shadowed the convoy, waiting for the perfect moment. Finally, after 5 hours, her torpedoes ripped into Okuni Maru, breaking the freighter in 2. As the American submarine slipped away under powerful rain aerial bombardments, one detonated dangerously close, tearing off her port antenna and damaging vital equipment. Days later, the 3 submarines were ordered to assist in a rescue mission for Allied prisoners of war following the sinking of a Japanese transport. However, on their way there, the Americans encountered another massive convoy and decided to attack. Flucky didn't hesitate, ordering 6 torpedoes into the heart of the enemy formation, sinking the 11,700-ton tanker Asusa and the 20,000-ton escort carrier Unyo. Before continuing to the rescue and saving more than a dozen prisoners, pulling the rescuers from small wooden rafts scattered across the open ocean. By the fall of 1944, it was clear to everyone on board that Barb's fortunes had completely shifted. Once plagued by lackluster patrols, she was now striking with precision, her missions evolving alongside the changing tides of the war. In November, the submarine began her 10th war patrol with an attack group in the East China Sea, rapidly striking again with a powerful spread of torpedoes at lone transport Gokokumaru, sending her to the deep. Only days later, on the 13th, she sank the cargo ship Narumaru, followed by 2 additional schooners. The galloping ghost of the China coast. With a new year blooming, Barb began her 11th patrol off the east coast of China in January 1945. On the night of the 25th, Lieutenant Colonel Flucky discovered the secluded Namquan harbor, where more than 30 Japanese ships lay at anchor, dormant, and most importantly, unaware. Though the area was more shallow than he was used to, the skipper ordered his crew to sail the submarine right into the danger zone for a midnight surprise attack, telling his men, quote, "Okay, it's now time to take one of our well-known calculated risks." Right after midnight, Barb sneakily crept into the harbor undetected, her nervous crew holding their breath as the fathometer warned of shallow waters. From the periscope, they could see 3 Japanese destroyers prowling nearby, completely oblivious to the silent intruder. With this, Flucky finally gave the command to fire. In an instant, 4 torpedoes streaked from Barb's bow tubes, followed by 4 more roaring from the stern as the submarine spun to unleash her full fury. Within seconds, the Namquan harbor erupted in chaos. Ships shuddered and splintered under the impact as massive fireballs lit up the night. Japanese gunners, disoriented, shocked, and desperate, fired wildly into the darkness, unsure where the attack was coming from. The sheer audacity of a submarine, Operating in such shallow waters was completely unthinkable. Until now. Barb didn't need to wait to see the full damage. At 23 knots, she dashed for open water, zigzagging through uncharted shallows and weaving between Chinese junks. Right behind her, a destroyer that finally spotted the enemy behind such massive chaos quickly gave chase, lobbing shell after shell that splashed dangerously close. For 30 harrowing minutes, the submarine's crew braced for impact as the men working her radar plotted their escape. Finally, as the destroyer gave up, Barb dashed for the open seas, leaving behind a trail of burning wreckage and a stunned enemy. When all was said and done, the Gato-class submarine's torpedoes had made 8 direct hits, sinking 3 vessels and severely damaging 3 more. The dangerous striking of such a shallow and well-defended harbor earned the submarine a powerful nickname, the Galloping Ghost of the Chinese coast. For their actions, the crew earned a Presidential Unit citation, while Eugene Lucky Flucky was awarded the nation's highest award, the Medal of Honor. But after such an audacious display, as USS Barb's 12th patrol approached, everyone on board wondered how on earth they could possibly top that. Let's raise a rocket rumpus. Following the incredible successes of her 11th patrol, the crew of USS Barb returned to base elated, proud of their daring exploits. As naval leadership determined her next deployment would take place on the north coast of Japan, Flucky's orders were to raise a rumpus, attacking shipping wherever they could find it. Yet the commander's ambitions now went far beyond sinking vessels. Looking to push the boundaries even more, he envisioned something unprecedented, equipping the submarine with what he called ballistic missiles. At Flucky's behest, before leaving on patrol once again, Barb underwent a groundbreaking overhaul. At Pearl Harbor, the submarine was outfitted with no less than 72 5-inch spin-stabilized rockets, each tipped with 10 pounds of high explosive power, making the vessel one of the first submarines in history to deploy rocket weaponry. The launcher itself was an incredible technology. Bolted to the forward gun mount, it could be raised to a 45-degree angle and configured to fire a dozen 4-foot-long Mark 10 rockets simultaneously. The implications of this new technology were groundbreaking. With a range of nearly 3 miles, these rockets turned her into a predator, capable of striking both ships at sea and coastal targets alike. For the first time, a submarine could bombard enemy harbors and installations, crippling supply lines and devastating defenses once thought impregnable. By June 8, 1945, Barb was ready to deploy on her 12th patrol alongside her new arsenal. With the crew preparing to sail north to Japan's coastline, Flucky and his crew were eager to test the potential of their cutting-edge weaponry. Rockets away, the ingenious skipper got his chance to make history on the night of June 22, 1945. As USS Barb silently slipped into the harbor of Shari under Commander Flucky's orders, the gunnery team crew worked in near-total darkness, while the men working the periscope had their eyes wide open, looking for unsuspecting targets. On the bridge, Flucky donned his polarized goggles, flipped them to their darkest setting, steadied himself, and yelled out loud, quote, "Rockets away." With this, a blinding flash of blue-white light erupted across the deck, followed by the powerful roar of a dozen rockets tearing through the night sky, illuminating the harbor for a brief moment. Then came the impact, as massive explosions ripped through the factory district, throwing debris and fire into the air. As the flames surged skyward, several buildings and other facilities crumbled under the incredible force of the barrage. Below deck, the crew erupted in cheers, knowing they had just performed the first ever rocket assault by a submarine. But before they could fully bask in their success, the skipper ordered an immediate retreat, and Barb dashed for open water, zigzagging through the darkness to avoid potential retaliation. By the time the enemy realized what had happened, Barb was already racing toward the western edge of the Sea of Okhotsk. Once they were in safe waters, back in the conning tower, Flucky and Swish stood together, exhilarated yet focused. The men wasted no time and began plotting new opportunities to wreak havoc on the now faltering Japan. Now there's a target I would like to blow up. By the latter half of 1945, Japan's war machine was on the brink of collapse. Her once mighty fleets lay in ruins, sunk by the unstoppable and precise assaults of the United States Navy. Now, what little remained of her ships clung to the coastline, moving only under the cover of darkness. But rather than being easier for submarines like Barb, the hunt had become far more dangerous. In order to find targets, These American vessels had to creep perilously close to the Japanese home islands, where massive shore batteries, aircraft, and sub-hunting corvettes waited to strike at anything that came near them, turning this into one of the most perilous arenas for American subs in the entire war. By July, Flucky found fewer and fewer ships to stalk. Smoke plumes on the horizon, once a familiar and exciting sight, had all but disappeared. Instead, Barb and her men patrolled the calm waters of Patience Bay near Otasamu on the east coast of Karafuto, boring themselves with routine procedures and longing for the thrill of their earlier and much more successful exploits. It was here, through his periscope, that the skipper noticed something interesting. A rail line running along the coastline, with trains moving steadily up and down towards their destinations. The mere sight fascinated him. Flucky watched as feathery plumes of locomotive smoke wound their way through the mountains. He knew these trains were vital lifelines for the Japanese, carrying troops and war supplies south towards the nation's heartland, reinforcing defenses as the Allies prepared for invasion. For days, the clever commander meticulously tracked their movements through his periscope, studying their schedules, counting their cars, and imagining the thousands of tons of valuable materials they carried, unprotected, yet tantalizingly out of reach. Then, as if struck by inspiration, Flucky exclaimed, quote, "Now there's a target I would like to blow up." Let's get on with it. Flucky's casual remark about targeting a train wasn't taken lightly by Paul Swish Saunders. Sitting at a plotting table with a topographic map spread before him, the chief of the boat began tracing rail lines and mapping out all potential possibilities for this unthinkable challenge. Slowly, he came up with a daring plan. A small group of Barb's crew would sneakily infiltrate the coastline, make their way to the tracks, and plant powerful explosives to derail an enemy train. When Swish explained his idea, Flucky's face lit up. Smiling, he simply said, quote, "Well, let's get on with it." Working with Bill Hatfield, the boat's third-class electrician's mate, Swish fastened a 55-pound bomb from a scuttling charge, wiring it to 3 dry cell batteries housed inside a pickle can, which he christened the land torpedo. But there was one major problem: how to detonate it without risking the crew's lives. Hatfield, drawing on his childhood as the son of a railroad worker, came up with the solution. Back in the day, he would place nuts between railroad ties as a boy and watch how the pressure of a passing train would crack the shells. With this knowledge, he devised a rudimentary pressure switch built from a wedge-shaped piece of wood and rigged to the detonator. Once the train passed by the rail, its weight would compress it into the switch, triggering the explosives. With the device complete, Flucky carefully assembled the crew in the wardroom. A total of 8 men were selected for the mission and divided into 2 teams. The captain's criteria for selection were strict. These men had to be physically fit, quick-witted, and capable of surviving on their own if left behind. Only one married man, Hatfield, was chosen, while Swish, having served aboard Barb for all 12 of her war patrols, was an obvious choice. In the end, Lieutenant Bill Walker, Barb's engineering officer, was placed in charge of the mission, leading the first boat while Swish commanded the other. Before leaving for their most daring and dangerous raid yet, Flucky, always thinking ahead, had the men practice bird whistles to use as signals in the dark. Should the unthinkable happen, he wanted them to have the best fighting chance to survive. Now or never. The night of July 23, 1945, was pitch black, the moonless sky providing the perfect cover. Flucky maneuvered Barb within 1,000 yards of the beach. Before his team of men left, Flucky, standing on the deck, delivered his final instructions with quiet intensity. The submarine could wait no more than 3 hours. Just 15 minutes before dawn would risk exposing them all, stating, quote, "Boys, if you get stuck, head for Siberia, 130 miles north. Follow the mountain ranges. Good luck." 8 men, with faces darkened by shoe polish, jumped silently into rubber boats, carrying the ultimate tool of sabotage. Navigating through the black waters with compass bearings, the men reached the beach and dragged their boats ashore. 2 of them were left behind to guard the rafts, while the remaining 6 carefully slipped inland, sprinting past the silhouettes of homes, stumbling through drainage ditches, and dashing across a quiet highway to reach the rail line. Now, the group split up again. 3 took up positions as lookouts, while Hatfield and Saunders got to work. As Walker climbed a water tower to scout the area, he froze at the sight of a Japanese sentry, completely asleep at the top. Slowly, he retreated, careful not to make a sound. Below, Hatfield and Saunders worked in the shadows, excavating gravel and positioning the 55-pound charge and its pressure switch with precision. Suddenly, the quiet was broken by a sound. Footsteps of someone running toward them. Paddle like the devil. Just as Hatfield's hand gripped his weapon, Swish appeared behind him, whispering sharply, quote, "Take it easy. At this time of night, there's no one running up this track except a scared American." The noise came from one of their sentries, breathless, as he reported a guard shack further down the line with a lone figure asleep inside. But their relief was short-lived, as the unmistakable rumble of an incoming locomotive sprang them into action. Without hesitation, the men dropped to the ground, lying motionless along the track as the train roared past, so close they could clearly see the engineer's face as the express thundered by. Wasting no time, Hatfield and Saunders resumed their work, setting the charge with quiet efficiency, and though everyone had been ordered to keep their distance as the men armed the device, just in case it detonated prematurely, none of the teammates could resist leaning in, watching nervously as he placed the pressure switch between the rail and the wooden tie. When the job was done, the 6 men dashed for the beach, where the rafts were still guarded by their teammates. But as they paddled halfway back to the Barb, a distant whistle pierced the night air. A train was coming, quite ahead of schedule. If they didn't reach the sub in time, the explosion and ensuing fireball would expose the rubber boats and the submarine alike, making them sitting ducks for anyone watching the coastline. Back on Barb, Flucky couldn't risk moving closer to shore. Grabbing a voice-powered megaphone, he bellowed into the night, quote, "Paddle like the devil. We're leaving." Boom. The 8 men paddled with every ounce of strength they had, hearing the train's whistle growing louder with each passing second. Just as they reached safety, it happened. A thunderous explosion tore through the night, shaking the ground and sky alike. A blinding flash lit up the coastline, followed by a column of white and black smoke. The train's 15 cars crashed into one another, folding and piling into a chaotic mess of twisted metal and splintered wood. Flucky later described the scene in his memoir, recalling, quote, "The boilers of the engine blew. Engine wreckage flying up some 200 feet, racing ahead of a mushroom of smoke, now white, now black. 16 cars piled up, into and over the wall of wreckage in front, rolling off the track in a writhing, twisting maelstrom of Gordian knots." As Barb finally prepared to slip away at high speed, preparing to submerge, the raiding party climbed aboard, catching fleeting glimpses of the destruction they had unleashed ashore. Once inside, the exhilarated saboteurs cheered and clapped as they disappeared into the deep ocean. The July 1945 mission capped one of the most successful patrols in submarine history. Alongside the outstanding 96,000 tons of enemy shipping Barb had destroyed, the crew could now count one obliterated train among their victories. Following the event, USS Barb's battle flag was updated. Among the markers were stars for ships sunk, bars for successful patrols, and something no other submarine could claim, a train proudly stitched to commemorate their one-of-a-kind mission. Powerful legacy. In her final days on patrol, Barb prowled the coast, turning her remaining rockets on the factory town of Shiratori. No less than 30 launches later, Japan's largest paper factory lay in complete ruins. Swish, never one to let an opportunity pass, directed the 5-inch deck gun at a leather tanning factory, producing pilot uniforms, reducing it to smoldering rubble. Later, the gunners trained their sights on a shipyard, leaving it engulfed in flames. Along the rim of the Sea of Okhotsk, Barb continued her rampage, destroying small craft and medium-sized vessels alike, delivering blow after blow to Japan's war effort. On August 2nd, 1945, Barb's historic patrol came to an end as the submarine returned to Midway Atoll. There, Commander Eugene Flucky received his 4th Navy Cross. Days later, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki brought Japan to its knees, signaling the end of World War II. In a final tally, the United States Navy credited Flucky with sinking 17 enemy vessels, 96,628 tons, and most notably, a 16-car train. During her 12 war patrols, 5 in the European theater and 7 in the Pacific, he earned a staggering total of over 60 awards and commendations, including a Medal of Honor, Navy Crosses, and a Presidential Unit Citation. But if you asked Flucky which achievement mattered most, he wouldn't point to the medals or the tonnage. Through more than 400 shells, bombs, depth charges, countless near misses, daring escapes, and one of the most unlikely hits of the entire war, USS Barb had emerged victorious, all without a single loss of life.